peeps, welcome to another video. Today is the half circle skirt tutorial. Now this is an incredibly easy skirt to draft and make. The only difficult part is letting the bias hang and then leveling out the hem. I'm going to show you a different method than I used last time, which was using a dress form to level the hem out. This time I'll be doing it laying it flat and measuring, which if you don't have a dress form hopefully is helpful. So this is definitely a starting from absolute scratch and walking you right the way through from starting to draft your pattern to the final stitch in hemming your skirt. I know there are a lot of tutorials out there that are a lot shorter than this one, but this one I wanted to make sure that it was absolutely beginner friendly and something that everybody could achieve. So I hope you enjoy the detail that's gone into making this skirt. Let's get started. So for this tutorial you're going to need the by hand London circle skirt generator, your fabric, a long ruler, pins, bias binding, matching thread, a pen or pencil, soft tape measure, scissors, and you're also going to need some pattern making paper. Mine is on a giant roll, so I'm not going to attempt to put it on top of my laptop. That would be bad, but yes, pattern making paper. Okay, so to start off with, you're going to need the by hand London circle skirt calculator. I work in inches. We want a half circle skirt this time. I'm going to go for midi again, and you've got to remember that this measurement does not include ease. So the waist measurement that you put in, you need to put your actual waist measurement in plus the wearing ease that you would like to have in your skirt. So my actual waist measurement is 27.5. I'd like 1.5 inches of wearing ease, so I have put in 29. Then you just click do the maths please, and it will give you your radius and the fabric length required. And it says that I've chosen a skirt that will not fit onto a standard 45 or 60 inch wide fabric. How about going for a shorter length or less full? We're not going to worry about that because we're actually going to fold our skirt slightly differently to the way that they folded theirs here, but I'll get to that when we come to cutting out the skirt. So the number we want to remember is 8 3/4, and down here is just a quick note to say that they have included a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a hem of 1 inch, so this is important to note as well. Okay, so I have a large piece of pattern making paper and I've used the straight edge from the roll and I have drawn a right angle, so I've drawn a line in there, and I need to measure from this corner point here 8 3/4 inches down that way and 8 3/4 inches down that way, and then I need to mark points to join those two lines up 8 3/4 inches the whole way around. Somebody said in the last circle skirt tutorial that I did you can use a compass. Yes, a compass would be very quick and definitely something to do if you have one. I don't, so I'm having to draw it in by hand, but yes, you can use a compass and put the point of the compass there, set it 8 3/4 inches, and then just draw a semicircle or a quarter circle in there. Okay, so as you can see, I have marked my 8 3/4 inches from this point, and then I have done lots of little tick marks, and then I've joined those all up. Next thing that we want to do is put on the length of the skirt that we want. Now I want mine to be 29 inches long, so I am going to do that measurement from the 8 3/4 point mark here. So I'm going to measure 29 inches long from this point. I'm going to do the same on this side. Okay, so I've marked my 29 inches from the bottom of my 8 3/4, and that's 29 inches there. And I've also marked one just down there. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tape measure, and I'm going to lay the top of the tape measure flat across this line, and I'm going to mark 29 inches, and I'm going to draw myself a whole bunch of tick marks all the way around. If you have a giant compass, amazing, and that again will totally work. Yeah, so I'm gonna do 29 inches all the way around and then join all the tick marks up, and that's going to be our pattern piece. Okay, so once you've drawn all your little marks on, you want to join those up, and then that's it. That is it for your circle skirt pattern. You need to draft the waistband, but for the circle skirt portion we are done. So you want to write who it's for, the date you made it, the measurement that you use for the waistband, and I like to include how much wearing ease I've added, what it is. So it's the half circle skirt, and you want to cut one of those on the fold. Now, a thing to bear in mind that there is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on that back seam there. So when we come to cut this out, we are going to cut one out on the fold, and that will be the half circle skirt. I'm now going to draft the waistband, and I'm going to show you how I do that. If you've been following along with the skirt tutorial and you've already made yourself a circle skirt pattern, you don't actually need to draft yourself a new waistband. The waistband you drafted for your full circle skirt will work for your half circle skirt. But if you haven't, what I like to do is I like my waistbands to be 1.5 inches wide, and then you need to add seam allowance to the top and the bottom and both short ends, so that the seam allowance matches up with the seam allowance used on the skirt pattern. Now you're going to need to cut 2 of these. So again, I've put loads of information on here. I'm going to put 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. It's the half circle skirt waistband, the size waist that I've drafted for with the amount of wearing ease that was included in that. We want to cut 2 of the fabric, and we want to cut 1 of the interfacing. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance included in this. I mean, this one's obvious because I've drawn the box on and then I've drawn the seam allowance on around it, but just in case you didn't do it like that, because there are no instructions for these patterns, you need to give yourself as much information for when you come to make this skirt in the future. And again, congratulate yourselves because you have just drafted a pattern. It doesn't matter if it's a simple one, you have drafted a pattern. Okay, so again, the fabric, the pattern won't fit on the fabric if I fold it selvage to selvage, so I've actually folded it lengthways down like that, and that's the selvage there, and that's the selvage there, and I've pinned out the waistband. So I'm going to cut 2 of those, and I'm going to cut this on the fold, and that is it. You're going to have 3 pattern pieces only. Okay, so the first thing you want to do with your skirt is finish off the 2 raw edges, and you're going to need to do this with either an overlocker, zigzag the hem. I like to use bias binding. I'm sure that's no surprise to any of you. I'm sewing the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the fabric down this groove, keeping the edge of the binding right up against the edge of the fabric. So that's the first step. So next up I use this is my blind hem foot, but if you have an edge stitch foot, that's just as good, if not better. And so I have turned the fabric, so this is the right side of the fabric, and I'm just wrapping the binding over the edge, and I do that by hand. This finger I push the fabric side down, and then with the other hand I push the binding down, and I run the edge of my foot along the edge of the binding, and I find that gives me a really nice neat finish. So we're going to do that on both sides. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do is interface your waistband, and it's the waistband that is going to be the outer waistband. And I've used a medium weight interfacing because I have found that lighter weight interfacings mean that my waistbands crumple down on themselves, which I don't like. So once you've interfaced your waistband, you then want to pin it to the top edge of your skirt, right sides together. I personally like to find the centre, and I do that by folding the skirt in half and putting a pin in, and folding the waistband in half and putting a pin in. I then put a pin in I line up the edges and put a pin in there, and then I pin in between those 2 marks, so that way I am sure that I've evenly distributed all of the fabric, because this is a curved edge, so it can get distorted, so you want to be careful about that. The next thing we're going to do is sew this at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew it with the skirt side up, because again this is a curved edge and there is a lot of fullness here. This is flat, the waistband is flat, so if anything's going to misbehave, it's going to be the skirt, and I want that on the top so that I can see it misbehaving and hopefully correct it before anything too drastic happens. Right, so once you've sewn the waistband onto the skirt, you want to press all of the seam allowances up into the waistband, so I'm going to go do that now. So next up you want to sew your zip in, and I've already done one side of mine, and what you want to do is you want to sew the right side of the zip to the right side of the skirt, and I like to match my zipper tape up to the top of my waistband, and I use my invisible zipper foot, and I move my needle 1 tick over to the left when I'm sewing the left hand side, and then 1 tick over to the right when I'm sewing the right. Then I zip up the zip, and you can see here there's a mark there, and that's just telling me where the waistband is, so that when I put the other side of the zip onto the other side of the skirt, it gives me a fighting chance of having that seam line up once the zip is in. Okay, I haven't pressed this yet, but the waistband is meeting up. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to press this once I've sewn the bottom of this seam together, but the next thing we're going to do is attach the inner waistband or the waistband facing. Now if you want to stitch in the ditch, which is something that I'm going to do, you want to turn the bottom of your waistband facing or inner waistband up by just 1/8 of an inch less than the seam allowance. So we're using 5/8 of an inch, so you want to turn it up by 1/2 an inch on the inside. Personally, I'm actually going to finish mine with bias binding. I did this with the last skirt tutorial and I really like the way it looked, so I'm going to apply bias binding to one edge of my waistband. Okay, so once you've finished the edge of your inner waistband in the manner that you want to, for me bias binding, or if you want to turn it up and press it that way, you want to pin the right side of the inner waistband to the right side of the outer waistband along the top edge. Now we're not going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch, we're actually going to sew this at 3/4 of an inch, because that way we're going to go across the line of stitching here where we've put in the zip, and it will also mean that we'll be right up to the zipper stop at the top of the zipper tape, which will end up with a really nice neat finish. Okay, so I've sewn that at 3/4 of an inch, and that just means that it's gonna, when we fold this one in, it's going to be, the zipper tape's going to be nice and flush against the top of the waistband. So the next thing we want to do is press the waistband facing and all of the seam allowance, press that up, and then we're going to understitch. Okay, so I have understitched the seam allowance to the inner waistband piece. So what I'm going to do now is go back and press that over, and we're understitching because that will help the waistband stay in and roll towards the inside of the waistband. Now, yeah, this interfacing seems to be puckering a bit, but it'll be okay. I will press the crap out of it and it'll be fine. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is attach the sides of our the waistband to the edge and zipper teeth of our skirt. So you want to, once you've pressed the understitch waistband down like that, you want to then put the right sides of the waistband facing and the right sides of the outer waistband together. You want your line of stitching to be kind of rolled over the top, and you want to sew down close to the zipper teeth but not right up to the zipper teeth. And I like to use my zipper foot, and I have my needle just one tick over from not hitting my zipper foot, and you sew all the way from the top of the waistband down to the hem of the inner waistband, back stitch, and then I have trimmed off all of the bulk up here so I can turn this out the right way, and not with one hand apparently, 2 secs. So you want to turn it out the right way, give the top of the zip a little tug just so that it kind of all lines up, and then on the inside there I've got a mark on my fabric. You can see that you have sewn it away from the zipper teeth so that it won't interfere with the zip being used, but you have a nice clean finish at the top. I'm actually going to go back and trim a little bit more of the bulk away from here because it's quite bulky under here. But once you've turned it through and seen that it works, you can then trim away as much bulk as you need to. Stupidly, I've managed to delete the footage of me actually doing these steps, so I'm going to show you what I'm doing. We've just sewn up the zippers and turned them the right way round, so you've got your zipper foot on, and this time I've moved the needle all the way over to the right, and we're going to close up the back seam whilst we still have the right foot on. So what you want to do is you want to pin the back seams together, and you're going to start stitching, and as you can see here I've done it, you're going to start stitching about 2-3 millimeters before the end of your stitching that has secured your zip, and you're going to stitch from there. You're going to back stitch there, and you're going to stitch all the way down to the hem, and that's going to close your back seam of your skirt. There you go, you can see there. You're never going to be able to get right up to the line of stitching that's installed your zipper, but you're going to get close to it. So I'm about 2-3 millimeters away, and I'm about 2-3 millimeters overlapping with that set of stitching. And again, I've managed to delete the footage of this step, so I'm going to show you what you need to do. Once you've closed up the back seam of your skirt, you're then going to want to secure your inner waistband down, and the way I like to do that is by stitching in the ditch. Now, I've finished the inside of my waistband with bias binding. You can have turned yours under if you don't want to do this step, so you've pre-pressed yours under, and what you want to do is from the right side you want to pin through the ditch that is created by the line of stitching that secured your skirt to your waistband, and you're going to pin through all the layers. And for me that means leaving this free, but if you have this pressed under as your finishing technique, you want to make sure that you're catching all of the layers under there. You're going to pin the entire way along your waistband, and then you are going to literally stitch in the ditch, and you can just see there that line of stitching that I have run. And so you start at one side where the zip is, back stitch, and then just stitch all the way around to the other side of the zipper, back stitch there as well, and that way you have finished the inside of your waistband. And now I'm going to give this skirt a good press, because that it desperately needs. Okay, so this is why we let hems drop, because that's the bias that has completely stretched out from the original length of the skirt. So what we need to do is find the shortest point on the skirt and take that measurement and make markings all the way around the bottom of the skirt. And I'm going to do that lying it flat with pins. Okay, so I'm going to take my tape measure. I'm going to put the top of the tape measure flat against the waistband. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. So this skirt was cut at 29 inches. I've just moved the tape measure away from the top. So what I'm actually going to do is go around and I'm going to hem. Why that flat? So what I'm going to do is go around and I'm going to mark at 28 inches the whole way around the bottom of the skirt, and I'm going to do that in very small increments. I'm going to use my pins to mark that point, and once I have a nice line of pins, I'm then going to cut off the excess. So I'll show you what I mean as I go around. So this is what you want to end up with, like a line of pins that are at your desired length and that clearly show you how much bias you're going to need to cut off. I need to carry on and go around the rest of my skirt because I've only done a quarter of it, but this is what you want to end up with. Okay, so my last pin is in. I have marked the whole hem. Now what I need to do is chop off the excess, and I'm going to cut really close to this side of the hem, so on this side of the line of pins that I've done, so that I can keep as much of the length as possible. So once you've cut off the excess, you should still have your line of pins in there, and then you should have all the excess that has dropped on the bias. So the biggest part of this is 5 inches long, and then it goes down to practically nothing, and then back up to a couple of inches there. So yes, that's why we need to let our hems drop. I'm going to hang this up and double check that it's lying flat. There we go, the hem of that is so much better. It's never going to be like 100% perfect, and I'm human and I'm going to live with that. But when I've actually put the binding on and hemmed it, I think it's going to look really good. So that's what we're going to do next. So the next thing that we want to do is to sew on the bias binding. So I have the right side of the binding on the right side of the skirt, and I'm starting at the back seam, and I'm going to sew in this ditch the whole way around, leaving, I've got a couple of inches here, and I'm going to stop at around about that point at there, and so that I can join the binding together at the end. Okay, so I've sewn the binding on the whole way around, and I've just left a gap there because we need to join these two together so that we can sew it with a clean finish. Now, if this binding was going to have any kind of movement in it, as in like an armhole, I would be doing this slightly differently, but it's not. It's on a hem, so I'm going to do it this way, which is not stabbing myself with a pin in the thumb. Ow. Right, so you want to kind of line the excess binding up with the bottom of the skirt hem and stick a pin in it. So once you stuck a pin in it, that's way too short. You can see that there's not enough binding to fit into that bit of skirt. So I'm going to move the pin up a little bit. We'll try that again. That's much better. So what I'm going to do is sew from this crease to this crease and back stitch at the start and the finish, and then I can chop off the excess of the binding because this is actually still attached to the roll on my lap. Okay, so once you have sewn that piece together, you want to trim off the excess, and then you want to finish sewing your line of stitches. So starting just where you've on top of where you finished before, sewing over to here and back stitching here. Okay, so once the binding is on, what you then want to do is give it a press through round to the wrong side of the fabric, and then we're going to finish it by hand. So the right side should look like this, and the wrong side should have the binding like this. So yeah, I'm now going to slip stitch it to the main fabric to finish the skirt. Okay, so I am hemming my skirt with teeny tiny little stitches so that it's not visible or too visible from the right side. And the way I'm doing that, and let's see if I can do this through the viewfinder, is I've just taken 2 or 3 strands of the main fabric of the skirt in this stitch, and I'm going through at the corresponding point of the binding, and I'm putting the needle through the crease of the binding about 1 inch, pull that through, and then, and again this is when I'm going to see if I can do this in the viewfinder. So we want to take a couple of strands of the right side of the fabric for the skirt on the needle, and then at the same position as you just took that stitch, you want to go through the binding about 1 inch and make a step. And one of the things that I've seen lots of people do with when they're sewing binding onto hems is do lots of tiny little stitches, and you can do that, but you don't necessarily want to, because A, it will take you a very long time, and B, the tighter that you hem a circle skirt, the more chance you have of it puckering up. So if you take quite large stitches in, or large chunks, so about 1 inch of binding in between each stitch, you end up with a secure hem, one that looks good from the right side and from the inside. And there you have your very own half circle skirt. There will definitely be more of these in my future. It's a lovely shape to wear. It's very flattering, I think, and whilst it still has lots of movement, it's not quite as prone to blowing up and showing the world your underwear as a full circle skirt can quite often be. So a half circle skirt also makes a great lining for a full circle skirt, a 3/4 circle skirt, or also very full dresses, rather than having to cut out the same volume of fabric from a lining material. A half circle skirt is a great alternative to add underneath, because it will still give you ease of movement, but it won't be as fabric hungry for one, and as bulky as some of them can be. And also, again, with the whole blowing up of the big full skirts, a half circle skirt, petticoat or lining underneath will, in most cases, help preserve your modesty. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!